Good morning.
Morning.
Very good to be here. Thank you for the invitation to Jonathan. Very grateful for the opportunity to be here. I've only known Jonathan since this year. We were at a conference together. We met at a conference and we seemed to hit it off straight away. I think we've got the same sort of mischievous streak that conferences bring out. And I wondered if we were perhaps separated at birth. But it's the first time I've ever visited this fellowship. I've been to this building, but it's the first time I've ever been here. But it does feel strangely familiar because there are a lot of familiar names and faces. I spent 3 years at Sheffield University, 1988 to 91. If you say it fast, it doesn't seem that long ago. When you go back, do you forget that there was like 10 years, if I think back to 1995, I think it's 10 years ago. But it's not. Yeah. But anyway, but I was a member of the Central House Church under Peter Fenwick in those days, and so I knew. And John and Sheila Holt were my house group leaders. Taught me a lot. I still repeat their advice to our young people when we get the people coming saying, "I can't come to something because I've got revision." So it's very, very good to be here. Those were formative years for me. I studied chemistry. I've never entered a lab since I left, but they were foundational. We had the chance in those days to spend 3 years at university growing up. And you know, when you got to 18 and you didn't know what to do, you think, well, I'll go to university. Because 18 to 21 was a big change. And it was a real formative time. I suppose these days with student loans and all sorts of things, there's more of a consideration as to what you do and why you do it. But I had a chance to go. I thought, well, I like chemistry. Let's go and do that. And so we came along and I had a really good time in Sheffield. You'll probably tell from my accent, I'm not a Sheffield native, born and bred. I come from Surrey. Yeah. True blue. Mrs. Thatcher's own backyard. So forgot to call me to ministry in the South Yorkshire coalfields. It's quite entertaining at times. Yeah, very, very good. Anyway, I've already just mentioned, I don't want to get confused, I know that I don't want to give them time, but I will be talking about a little bit of the work that we do in Zambia, and in particular the work that we're doing in Mexborough. As part of the work that we do in Zambia, we have a charity called Sika UK, which is helping children that are affected by AIDS, HIV, some orphans, poverty in all its forms, that it becomes life-limiting to children and families. And so one of the things that we do is sponsor education. And we have, every year we have child sponsorship scheme, but we also have fundraising this time of year where we raise enough money to send as many children as we can into school for the next coming year. And one of the things we've done this year is produce a calendar. We've got there's like a little desktop calendar there. And these pictures were taken in July on the team that Aidan mentioned, and they're very nice, beautiful. I designed this. Yeah. So there we go, and that can go on your desk. And then there's a hanging one there as well. A little lad there called Isaac, hoping to get him sponsored, and you know, all of them. They're just nice little stocking fillers. They come with a cardboard envelope. You'll notice there's a couple of companies named on there. Tony Slater Plasterers, he's a member of our church, and somebody else who's a relative of members of our church. And those two companies sponsored the production of this completely. So when we sell these, we're trying to sell these at £6 each. Every pound then goes to sponsorship of children's education. So it's not merchandise as such, it's good fundraising for a good cause. And so we've got a load over there, and if you're interested in those, please do have a look and let me know, and we'll be able to furnish you with one or two or three. Jonathan has asked me to share a little bit of our story about what is going on in Mexborough, particularly over the last 6 years, where we've been leading a church. Mexborough, if you don't know it, often people say, even from South Yorkshire, say, Mexborough, where's that? Between Rotherham and Doncaster, a little bit back down the parkway, and I'm happy to do that. But I think in order to do that and to make sense of it, we have to share a little bit of the backstory as well as to how we came to be there. So from the time I left Sheffield in 1991, went back to my hometown of Addleston in Surrey, and from that time, in one way or another, I've been involved in full-time church leadership. I was taken on by my home church as a youth and community worker. As a 21-year-old, it was quite entertaining and interesting and challenging because we had no youth. We borrowed them from the Baptist church. Got into terrible trouble when I tried to baptise some Baptist youth, and not according to the rule book. So, but anyway, we had I was the sort of youth worker for the Baptist church, but paid by another church. But it all worked out very well in the end anyway. But that was 1991. And as a 21-year-old chemistry graduate, I decided and I was encouraged that I needed a little bit more training than I'd already got in chemistry to do ministry. And so I embarked on a 2-year, 1-day-a-week theological training at Spurgeon's College in London. And at the same time, our church was loosely affiliated to the Pioneer Network, which at that time was led by Gerald Coates. And Jeff Lucas, who some of you may have heard of or heard speak, was sort of affiliated to our church. That was a great privilege. It was our little church. We had Jeff Lucas come to our leadership team meetings and things. And yes, it was great. It was somebody, like we say, we like people who shoot from the hip and say it as it is. Well, Jeff is one of those. He threw all sorts of cats among pigeons. But he suggested that I do Thai teams, training in evangelism, for a year. So as well as doing the theological training, I did this year's training in evangelism, and it was during that time that I met Erica, who's been my wife for the last 23 years. She's the daughter of the late, that sounds strange to say the late David and Margaret Mills. They were Elim missionaries in Ghana from 1966 to 1984. Yeah. Do you know them, Jeff? Yeah. Oh, great. And so she was born and brought up in Africa, West Africa, for the first 13 years of her life. And as I say, I'm a home counties boy, so I didn't have any international experience, except we did fly by Dan Air to south of France once for a camping holiday. and that was it. But I found while I was at university, through the agency of the Holy Spirit, through people like Jeff Williams and others, I found a stirring and an interest in the world, in the wider world, and a fascination with, I've got a world map, and I used to sit and dream about places I could go and things we could do and things to see, India and Africa, and it was really something that was not natural to me, but it was something that I think that God put in my heart. And so, as well as being in love with Erica, we also had a lot in common in terms of our goals and vision, and we knew that the wider world would play a key part in our life together. So it was that I began my vocational life in Christian ministry in a somewhat confused state. What was this ministry I was supposed to be being trained in? What was the church all about? I remember as a young, naive sort of trainee, when I had to write essays for Spurgeon, I said, I want to write an essay, extended essay. I want to write it on mission. And the tutor said, well, good luck. Well, what's so hard? Mission's great. Mission's awesome. Mission's exciting. And he said, yeah, well, there's as many different ideas about mission as there are people. And go into the library and look at the mission section. It's not one book. It's thousands of books. And so I left thinking, what is all this about? What is mission? Everybody's got a different idea. I was learning the academic approach to interpreting Isaiah. Don't bother with that. And I was learning how to do evangelism, which often involves standing on top of a stepladder in a town centre with a megaphone. Yes. Or knocking on people's doors pretending to do a survey. Or, there was all sorts of stuff that we used to do. Will you answer a few questions? Nobody ever, in those days, nobody ever asked, what are you going to do with this data? But we didn't do much with it. And I had a dream also about working in what was often termed the mission field in Africa or in India. And yet I was there in Addleston at my desk in my bedroom trying to make sense of what it was all about and what this mission was about. There's a quote, and hopefully it'll come up on the screen, that I was given around that time by a theologian called Emil Brunner. Is it on the PowerPoint? And he says this: the church exists by mission just as a fire exists by burning. Where there is no mission, there is no church, and where there is neither church or mission, there is no faith. And I remember that. It's an inspiring quote, but I remember it being used to reinforce the idea that a live and active church was one that was focused on overseas work. That's where mission was. We did evangelism from time to time, but mission was out there in Africa and India. A church could not be a church unless it was sending and supporting missionaries to other countries. And of course I had sympathy with that idea, because my heart and mind were often in those far-flung places. I wanted to be that. So in some ways it would have suited me, but it didn't sit right in terms of making sense what the church was really supposed to be about in terms of our actual work Monday to Friday. Why was mission only valid when it was somewhere else? And the best we could hope for was an evangelistic effort every now and again. It wasn't our life's mission. It wasn't the point to our existence. Our evangelism was more like a twice-yearly visit to the dentist. And even the pastor of the church at the time, whenever we had an evangelistic weekend, he said, "I'm not going." He didn't like it. We had people going out, having conversations on the street, and then somebody would come and say, "Oh no, people might come," and this is serious. Somebody said, "I'd really rather the church didn't grow, because new people bring all sorts of problems." So in the quietness of my own thoughts, I formulated a vision at that time that the church should be something that is continually building bridges, connections with the world around us at every level, that would knit the church into the heart of the community. Sometimes we aim like we're outside of the community and we're throwing bombs in through our prayers and through our evangelistic efforts and whatever. And yet I had this growing idea that the church should actually be the heart of the community, around which the community grows, from which the community draws its life, its energy, its vision, all of that. And at times that process might not look like overt evangelism. We might not mention Jesus in every conversation that we have, but it will open doors to people so they can easily become part of the church community and have easy access to the Word of God, and would ultimately find their salvation. I didn't know at that time. I was formulating, I suppose, like a life's vision that would begin to find its fulfilment now back in South Yorkshire. It made sense to me in any setting, whether in Africa or in Surrey, the church as a community of people living in the benefit of the good news they have discovered and living authentic, unashamed lives of faith in the heart of their own community. That makes sense to me as mission. And it sat much more comfortably with me than us just being like another voice in the marketplace. When I was a student at Sheffield, we would walk across to the Union from the chemistry building where I was, and the Opticon Centre there, and we'd have Revolutionary Socialists, Socialist Worker Party, and all of these guys, and they were all in a long line. I can't remember all the different groups that there were, shouting about this and that and the other. That's where I first heard the news that Mrs. Thatcher had resigned, and they told me. And I didn't want ours to be just a competing voice. A photocopy of that type of thing. It really mattered to me that somehow our vision, our mission was different. Anyway, I'm trying to kind of very long story short into our time. But during our time in Addlestone, which turned out to be much longer than I originally hoped, I became the pastor of that church in 1994, and we were there until the beginning of 2005, so a long time. The pastor who handed it over to me said, "Just do it for a couple of years and then go and do something else." But we were there for 11 years, and it was really a training ground. We went through a lot of experiences and challenges, and it taught me about the value of church and the value of, and what mission begins to look like as it's worked out in a local setting. Our connections with Africa, and in particular Zambia, grew, and I spent quite a bit of time each year, usually 3 trips travelling overseas, often to Zambia. And if I'm honest, my desire to see things move forward locally got a bit overtaken by all of that and our love for what we were doing overseas. And often we could be physically in a place, but our minds would be somewhere else. And so what I was trying to combat became real in my life, that actually there was a separation, that I could say, well, I'm here, I'm doing the work here, but my heart, my vision, my mission is somewhere else. And it took a friend of mine, a much older retired pastor, he's now with the Lord, who sort of took me to one side and challenged me in one of those ways that you don't like at the time, but you know the benefit of it afterwards, when he just said, "The thing is, you spend too much time thinking and talking about Zambia. And it looks like it's all you're interested in. But there's a church here that needs to be led. And you need to decide. If you want to go to Zambia, go. But if you want to be here, then be here." And it sort of, I thought, well, doesn't he know I've got a calling and all this, that and the other? But I began to understand that actually, yes, I needed to bring together this so that this mission vision that I had for Zambia also made sense in Addlestone. and the two came together. That we didn't say we do mission because we go to Africa, but we do mission wherever we are, and however that's expressed. That's why Jesus said, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth," not one or the other.
Yeah.
And so it was a bit of a wake-up call, but it connected me with that original conviction that there shouldn't be a separation in our mission vision. Local and global mission should have a seamless connection, aspects of exactly the same thing. And the decision I made at that time to focus again and to bring it down had quite a dramatic impact. I would like to say it was because of me, but I know it was the Holy Spirit who actually took hold of the church, and we invested time and money in our building. We invested effort in our sort of expansiveness and our proactivity in relationships with people and whatever. And the church grew from our usual 30 that it had been for a number of years to almost 100. We couldn't get people in, which was fantastic experience to go through for somebody who was used to pastoring a small church. And I had books on my shelf like, thanking God for the small church, etc. So we were set in our vision of being a small church, and suddenly we were a bigger church, and it was great to see. But just as that happened, just as we began to see all that, and after 11 years of time there, God called us away. And it's a long story, as I said, but we finally left Addleston in 2005, and we travelled to Zambia, having sold our house, packed up all our goods in a container, put them on a ship, and took two very uncertain young boys, they were smaller than they are now, out to Central Africa. Jacob didn't mind too much, he was fairly oblivious to it all. Aidan was shouting out and saying, "You're ruining my life." So you just heard him talking about leading a team of 21 people out of Zambia and all of that. I think he's changed his perspective a little bit. But anyway, we spent 5.5 years, almost 6 years in Zambia, during which time we founded, along with a great team of leaders, a ministry called Lord's Way Ministries, which I still oversee and I'm still part of, which we're going out to on Thursday. It's a church planting, church training ministry, which acts as an umbrella for a network of churches across Zambia, now in Malawi, in South Africa, and in the UK as well as the charity work that I've mentioned as well. So suddenly, after all those years and all that expectation that we'd had when we got married and we started to look into the future, we were suddenly immersed in life on the mission field as we had been taught it. And we found, to our surprise, that it wasn't really any different to what we'd left. The challenges of local church life, inspiring the local church in mission, working it out. We saw that those 11 years in Addleston really were the training ground. That really was the work that we were now called to do in Zambia. Often we were dealing with more people, more problems, but in essence the work was the same. And so what I'd wrestled with for so many years wasn't frustration because I couldn't get to where the real work was. I couldn't get to be the missionary that I wanted to be. But in actual fact, for all those years, I was doing the work. I was a missionary. I was working it out in the everyday in Surrey and now in Central Africa. So we lived and worked there until June 2010, and then we were approached by the church in Mexborough, where my father-in-law, the previous missionary to Ghana, had been the pastor also when they came back from Ghana, and he had been there and was no longer there, but we were approached by the church there. Would we consider leaving Zambia to come and lead the church in Mexborough? They knew that we wouldn't come, but they couldn't shake off the idea that they ought to ask us. So the pastor gave me a phone call and said, "I know you're not going to come. I know you're going to say no. Please feel completely free to say no, but I've just got to ask you, will you come and lead the church in Mexborough?" And I said, "Well, we'll think about it." And then he started crying. I don't know if that's because he really didn't want us to come. Or he was so moved with the possibilities. But anyway, there we are. But that's how that came about. But critically, by now, I realised that we were not, in making that decision that took us about 18 months to bring into reality, we hadn't gone out to the mission field for 5 or 6 years, and now we were leaving the mission field. We were just relocating to another part of the mission field. And Mexborough now, in our hearts and minds, was a place that we would approach and we would attack in the same way that we had done the work in Zambia and continue to do as well. So we did it with a great sense of expectation. The church culture we came into was more naturally geared to maintenance and care rather than mission. In fact, it's part of the Wesleyan Reform Union of Churches, which is a very good setup, but and they've had a long-standing vision, so we need to move from maintenance to mission. But the reason that we say that when we do that is because we know that we're in maintenance mode. And a lot of the churches are not only in maintenance mode, they're in full-on decline. A number of our churches locally, have closed down recently and selling off buildings, and we've got 2 members or 3 members. And no matter how many times you say, well, where 2 or 3 are gathered, it soon becomes unviable, practically. And so that's what happened. But we went with a sense of expectation that God was still going to do something. And we weren't going to preside over the slow demise of a church, but we wanted to see the possibilities of what God could do in a post-Christian culture and in a place that many would say had seen better days. So it wasn't a task standing in isolation, but it was part of a tapestry of vision God had been creating in our hearts over many years. And this was a time that I realised when the strands of thinking that had been built into me in Addleston and now in Zambia and now coming into Mexborough were going to come together, and there was almost like a perfect storm of things that would come and actually mean that we potentially could see more and do more than we'd done in any of the previous assignments that God had given us. That was our hope and our expectation and our prayer. And it was at that time that the thoughts I'd had in those first days as a 21-year-old chemistry graduate trying to work it out, saying, can the church build bridges and connections with the community at every level and knit itself in to the heart of the community? Maybe now was a time when we would begin to see the fulfillment of some of that. And so we embarked on a process that, again, when you think, like I said to the man, I want to talk about mission, how exciting that is. And when you come into a church, you think, let's grow, let's do mission, let's see what we can do. And you think everyone's going to say, yes, fantastic. But they don't always. And it was a painful process of change that we went through. But it's been absolutely worth it. And, this is where, I want to share. I know that there's an awful lot of work going on here. We've come and visited and we see the excitement, and I hear stories from churches all around of what God is doing in local communities, and we're just part of that bigger picture. But I can only tell you about what we've experienced and what we've done. We started approaching schools because we knew that in schools is the engine room of transformation of any community, because there are the young hearts there that if they can get educational inspiration and aspiration and excellence, as well as spiritual renewal in their hearts, then young people can change the world. And so we knew that schools were a key target for our prayers and for our activity. And so we went to 4 primary schools, and we were welcomed in on a fortnightly basis to do Christian assemblies. Every 2 weeks. It was quite a workload, but it was great to do. And we got known. You go around town and there's people waving at you. It's like you feel quite royal. Walking down and kids knocking on windows saying, "Nick, how are you?" And the looks you get from parents with the children waving at strangers is quite something to behold. Yeah, and so they, and we had a good time there. We live in a borough where, for whatever reason, for different reasons, schools are not really rated as excellent. There's so many challenges for schools and problems, and having seen it from the other side. And been in schools, you see the pressure that teachers are under and schools are under. But we also know that that their results matter. And so we thought, well as giving Christian education and Christian assemblies, what can we do to help the educational process? And so we started a maths club in one of the primaries where we did maths intervention for young children, and we saw kids as they prepared for their SATs. Who was struggling, said, I can't do maths, and just sit with their head on the desk, and like banging the pencil into the thing and not doing anything. Suddenly they begin to understand fractions, and they could achieve levels they never thought possible. And it just opened my eyes to the three-dimensional holistic approach to encouraging the whole person. I was asked to do some training. Again, I never really used my education. That's to say I never used it. Of course I used it, but I never technically. I wasn't a chemist or a scientist by trade. But I was able to go into schools and help some of the groups that were trying to go from a D to a C in science and maths. And one young girl who needed to get into university, and she had 3 months to get a C in maths, and I was able to help her with that, and I just felt that that was a positive witness, an opportunity to be a really part of the good news of somebody's story. And it was good to see. We had church members and leaders in place on governing bodies and in 2 chairmanship roles through significant turmoil, political upheaval that schools were going through. And the church was able to lead in that situation. We transformed a struggling youth club we'd been running for a few years into a Sunday night youth cafe drop-in, which was a big risk, bearing in mind what it means to engage with teenagers and young people in Mexborough. You probably have the same challenge over here. Unless they're all very well behaved here.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
And at times we had over 70 teenagers coming in on a Sunday evening. And we're amateurs, you know, we haven't got youth work degrees or anything like that. Probably better that we don't. And I did nearly meet an early end one evening as a table tennis bat was thrown at my head. I didn't even see it, I just heard it as it smashed into the wall behind me. The person themselves was repentant. I think we took that as a positive, and they confessed to my wife that they'd almost killed her boyfriend. And that was, you know, it really was challenging and difficult, but we saw it through, and we've beginning to see the fruit coming out now. We had a pleasant little youth group for church teenagers on Wednesday evenings, and then the Sunday night crowd turned up and blew it apart completely. We didn't know what to do with them, but we ended up staging an alpha course for teenagers, for 50 of them each week, and feeding them and all sorts of things. Somehow, and I don't know how we did it or why we did it, I do know why we did it, but we raised money to take 30 of these teenagers to Rock Nations in Bradford. And I think we raised about £7,000 or something, and we paid, because then we weren't going to get any money from families, and we thought by subsidising it, and in the end we raised enough money to fund it, and we took 30 in minibuses over to Bradford. We stayed in the Holiday Inn. It was unbelievable, and we went to, you know, we fed them each night, and we just saw people, and on the first night we had I think there were about 60 people responding for the first time to the gospel, and 12 of them were from our group, and they went forward, and you know the real story is when people go forward, it doesn't always mean that then they're going to turn into beautiful Christians the next week, and there's an ongoing process. But just to see people that had never been exposed to the Christian message before, standing and saying, I want to receive Christ in my life, was a real blessing. We have a regular Wednesday evening meeting now for the young people with worship, prayer, word, ministry. Most of the people coming never come on a Sunday morning, and we realise that actually that can be par for the course, but they are receiving a word, and God is speaking to young people, into the hearts of young people week by week. We have a toddlers group where a lot of churches have toddlers group, but again with an evangelistic vision, and we've opened it up, and you find the need, because again the council is just pulling out of everything, and there's no provision, and so just to provide, even if there was no Christian basis, just to provide a toddler group is a benefit. But we're up to capacity, about 35 families coming every week, and we've got a guy there, Cecil, from Northern Ireland, one of our members. He's just so bold with people, and so when people tell their stories over coffee, he says, right, I'm going to pray for you now, and pray. And then we've got people. One lady came. She lived in one of the worst streets in Mexborough. There is gun crime. Somebody was shot there the other day. There's guns and drugs and all sorts of stuff that goes on, and she was desperate to get out of there with her son. And so she'd seen and heard all the stuff about prayer, and so she came to Cecil and said, will you pray for me that I can get out of this? And so they stood with her in the car park and prayed for her. And within a few weeks, she'd worked out the way she'd managed to buy a house out of that situation. And you just really begin to see the possibilities of not just waiting for people to come on a Sunday, but actually going and being the heart of the community. Mexborough is sadly forgotten outpost of Doncaster Council. I don't wish to make this a political speech for Mexborough, but it does happen. And some time back, the council pulled out all the Christmas lights, and the local paper just put a black picture on the front page, said, here's our illuminations for the year. There was nothing. And so we decided we'd make Christmas a big feature of our annual calendar. And so each year we stage a big carols by candlelight, and we had up to 230 people coming. enjoying the evening and getting a presentation of the gospel at the same time. We have Forget-Me-Not event, a quieter time for people at Christmas when they're mourning the loss of loved ones, to come and remember and to think and to just to take some time and to receive a message of hope in the midst of their grief as well. And again, we've sort of seen 40, 50, 60 people coming to that, and we connecting with local undertakers and just being reaching out to families in need. We have a summer holiday club, up to 100 families, children coming. We have an annual football crazy event, proper good quality football coaching. We have football coaches that are UEFA trained and with England caps and all sorts of things. We had we were challenged to a match. I don't play football, but our church was challenged to a match by the local Marks and Spencer's management team because they thought it'll be an easy win. Playing the church is going to be fantastic. They said, and we're just going to, and they laughed about it, and they talked about it, and they said, we're going to see what happens now. The church reckons they can play football. Well, they didn't know that. We've got somebody who was on the edge of the Ghanaian national team. Somebody who had an England cap in their youth and is now the UEFA trained coach. We had somebody who's played for Doncaster Bell's women's team. We had, I can't remember how many different things. We killed them 10-0. Because we felt that it was a good witness. Win when we had the opportunity. So actively building bridges and connections, we've developed a good relationship with our local miners' welfare charity, which our church stands on the land there, and we have very positive connections with local councillors. We have our local councillor. Well, Mexborough has wiped out, the Labour Party has been wiped out in Mexborough. Like I said, we're a bit of a, not by the Tories, but there's been a bit of a backlash against Labour because of the Doncaster Council situation. So a new party called Mexborough First has come in and just completely swept the board. And we have a friend from my days as a school governor called Sean Gibbons. He calls himself Lord Sean Gibbons because he bought a little patch of land in Scotland. And we have a very good friendship with him. In fact, when I put on Facebook yesterday that I was coming here, he sent a message saying, the Lord will be with you, or something like that, because he always talks about doing the Lord's work because he's Lord Gibbons. But he has secured a lot of interest and finance for us, and so our partnership is now funded by the council and we are, because they've pulled out the youth work, we are now the youth providers. Our small little youth cafe has turned into the youth club from Mexborough, and we've been given the complete use of the youth centre with all its facilities, and we get paid to do it by the council, which is fantastic. And remembering our faltering efforts at evangelism in Thai teams back in the 90s, I was a bit wary of pub evangelism. You're going in and walking around and trying to talk to people in pubs. It was certainly would be a bit more risky these days. But through proactivity and relationships, the manager of our local Wetherspoons, where Aidan works actually, has come to us and said, will you come and hold a weekly coffee morning in the pub? Do whatever you want, alpha course, whatever. We'll give you space, we'll give you free coffee. So, I mean, that's an interesting dynamic, because people go to Wetherspoons to buy a cup of coffee, you offer them a free one and they don't want it. Or they won't drink the coffee, but they'll give you the money that they would have paid, or something odd like that. But we have that presence there as well. And so it's just beginning to see the fulfilment of the things that we'd hoped and prayed for even 25 years ago. Sunday mornings has grown as well. We rent the local academy school hall for our Sunday meeting, and we have capacity to grow. Lots of churches, as I said, are doing similar. We're nothing special, not suggesting that at all, but we're benefiting from years of wrestling with the question of what is mission all about and what is the church for. We used to look to Africa and think that's where it is. When we have feedback, when I went to Africa and I would come back and I would give feedback, it was, oh, it's amazing, you know, what happens out there. If only we could see what's happening out there here. And you know, again, there was something that wasn't quite adding up in my mind. I'm thinking, but we're in the same business. We're in the same task. And now what I see is that we're not, neither of us, whether the global scene or us here in the UK, neither of us is the poor relations. Yeah. But there is a crossover where we can be genuine mission partners in the same work. We have a mission field in Sheffield. We have a mission field in Mexborough. We have a mission field in Zambia. We have a mission field in India. There is so much that we can do, and we will only enhance the work as we cross over and see that we're all in the same business together. A friend of mine once had an inspired vision of a farmyard And he said that in parts of the farm there were beautiful state-of-the-art harvesters and machinery that had never been used. They were just parked up. The keys were up on the hooks, and the people were just sat there waiting for the day when there might be a harvest. They'd got all the resources, but they hadn't got the work. But in other parts of the farm there was a great harvest, and yet the workers were just toiling away with blunt knives and machetes and trying to bring in this harvest that they couldn't cope with. Meanwhile, the harvesters were parked up. And what he said was, the key was seeing that we all in the same farm, we all work together in the same, and so we need to employ our resources where the harvest is at any particular time. So if we have resources and skills and enterprise here, rather than just sitting here and waiting for the harvest, we need to employ those in Africa, we need to employ those in wherever it is. But at the same time, there is so much that is going on there that can be employed here. We've learned so much from what goes on in Zambia in terms of faith and prayer and expectation and spiritual ministry and deliverance and all of those things that we don't talk about so much here. But also we've been able to take that which we've learned about community evangelism, relationships, reaching out to people, spending time with people, things like care for people with alcohol and drug rehabilitation. We're not doing alcohol and drug, but we just see that here we have all those resources and understanding of the challenges that people face. And yet in Africa sometimes there is people are just left with difficulty, and we can combine all of that for the benefit of the kingdom of God and the furtherance of the vision that God has for His church. And that, I believe, is the place I've come to in my vision for mission. There are things we've learned and done in Mexborough that will work in other places. We're not now saying, oh, please teach us. We are saying, actually, it's not just about doing things in one certain way, but let's try. And Aidan mentioned, and I'm going to finish with this, Aidan mentioned the team that went out to Zambia in July. 21 people, 22 in total, wasn't it? Mostly from our church. I'm going to show you a short video in a minute, and you'll see some of the faces on there. Those are some of the guys from our church in Mexborough. And they went out there not just to say, well, let's go and see what mission looks like, but to take mission to Zambia as well. And so we looked at football. For example, Football Crazy, our event that we run for the young people in Mexborough. I thought that can work in Africa. That can work in conjunction with the Jesus film and the Crusades and everything else that is so natural in Africa. We can actually bring some of what we've learned that works in our community. We can take that into a situation in Zambia where they wouldn't have necessarily thought of that method of community engagement and community connection. And so that was the basic premise of the vision, and bringing the two things together, the best elements of what we do in Mexborough and the best elements of what we do in Africa, and brought it together and created something quite powerful, which was entitled Dare to Dream. And so I want to finish by showing a short video that Aidan made. He did this, actually. He's quite good with stuff like this. And it demonstrates visually, I think, much of what I've been trying to say, that mission is mission, and we are all workers in the harvest field wherever we are. And so I just want to close by showing you this little video, little set to music, and hopefully it will bless you and encourage you as well. Thank you very much.
Ecstatic.
Brilliant, love that word.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Fantastic.
Phenomenal.
Amazing. Tell you what, gold stars all round.
Welcome.
So deep. Yes, Jacob.
Unbelievable.
Darren. Brilliant. Overall, it's just been a brilliant time so far. And today's going to be even better. Too right, matey? Too right.
said what? It was upstairs.